Forgive, 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 forgive. Forgive, forgive. Forgive me, what? Eat my deep bitch.
The first time I met him, he had a bite on his arm. It wasn't like teeth marks. It was like a big chunk was taken out, like you might see photos of shark attack victims. And I thought to myself, this guy means business.
This is the first night of camp. First day, Frankie and I were sitting in the camp, in the cabin, sitting there talking, and I was playing guitar for him, and he tilted his head back, and he went into supposedly what he called a seizure, and I rushed him over to the nurse's office. They rushed him to the hospital. He went over to the hospital, and the doctor ended up calling me a little bit later that night and told me you faked everything. Kind of was upsetting for me. And he asked me, the next day he came back and he went to apologize to me. And he said that he was sorry that he faked it, he just did it all for attention.
Many times I've been asked, you know, to try and, I guess the word you would use is explain Frank. You can't explain Frank, you have to experience him.
Forgive, forgive, forgive. Kiss my ass. Don't be scared, bitch. Hold slut.
Frank knows how to get to people's emotions. Basically, he's a manipulator. That's my word to sum up Frank.
Hello, my name is Mr. Frank Di Capo. You fucked me up in the balls. Cut.
There was a time when the doctors wanted to remove Frank's teeth due to the self-mutilation with the biting and everything. And I absolutely refused. I said, there's got to be another way to do this. I said, you know, Frank's looks are important to Frank. I said his one enjoyment in life is eating. I said, and without teeth, the eating would be a very difficult process. So as we went on, we talked, we went down to physical therapy. We had to find a way to keep Frank from getting his hands to his mouth. And oh boy, did we go through some things. But anyway, we finally came up with orthoplast restraints for Frank that kept him from getting his hands to his mouth. Then he was able to keep his teeth, but they said if he started biting his mouth, biting his lips, biting the inside of his mouth, there would be no other alternative but to pull his teeth.
I have a condition called, the name is called Lesch-Nyhan Syndrome. Only 350 kids have it, and it will cut too much. See, I have this condition. It depends on how long I just bite myself.
But normally it was the fight of the century to get him ready for school. He didn't allow you to dress him, he made you dress him. You had to fight with him every inch of the way to get an arm through a sleeve, to get the leg through the pants. Putting shoes and socks on was a real trip. If he wasn't kicking you with the other foot, he was trying to deck you with his arm. It was always something. And if he couldn't do that, he'd try and get a hold of your hair and pull it out. Spit at you, try to bite you, whatever it took.
Ouch. Ouch, ouch. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. Up my ass, on my ass, bitch. On my ass. Bitch. Nigga. Hey, retard. What's up, bitch? retired.
I mean, Frank has escaped from an actual straitjacket. He's come out of leather restraints. He's come out of Velcro restraints. I mean, Frank does you a favor if he stays in any of the restraints that they put on him, just about. Frank is bound and determined to hurt himself. Not that he can help it, but he's bound and determined to do it. I mean, he's done things like, we had a space heater in our house at one time. He just politely laid his hand on it, knowing it was on, and, you know, reacted to the pain, but wouldn't take his hand off. I literally had to go over and take his hand off for him. We had just bought a wooden bed from Sears for him. Unfortunately, it was wood. Well, Frank would strain on his restraints. He would rock himself back and forth. I mean, he literally rocked the bed apart. I mean, he just tore it apart.
When we did used to camp out at camp, we would carry Frank's entire bed out to the campsite and strap him in out there.
We went through a very big deal when he was in high school. They were ready to expel Frank due to foul language. But then, you know, we had to have a big conference. Everybody was angry because of Frank and his language and some of his very rude behavior. So, you know, I had to go through the medical records with them and their student handbook, and I just told them, I said, your student handbook wasn't written with Frank in mind. And I said, that's not my fault, nor is it Frank's. You accepted him, you knew, and I said, you're just going to have to learn to deal with it. Use a timeout situation if you need to. Well, unfortunately, they used a timeout situation. They put Frank in a file office by himself. Frank proceeded to tear up the file room. They had files from one end of that room to the other. They called me. The principal said, do you realize that it's going to take somebody weeks to put all these files back together? I said, well, you had no business timing out Frank and leaving him alone.
I pissed him. I just pissed myself. Oh, by the way, you was him too?
Well, Frankie did have a couple problems with, you know, shitting. Did do a lot of shitting. Matter of fact, most of the time he shit, he just did it to shit to piss off people. He had a problem with pissing in his pants. Same thing. Matter of fact, the way we did change him was just tilt him back so his ass is sticking up in the air in his chair. Took off his diaper, wiped his ass. You know, the everyday thing you do to a little baby.
The thing about it was that somebody had to hold his legs back up over his head so he couldn't kick while the other person would change the diaper. And one time I was changing the diaper and Mike was holding his legs and he got loose. And man, he kicked me in the back of the head. I saw stars, it was hard. And I said, why did you do that? And Frankie said, muscle spasm.
We had one time at school where Frank broke out with diaper rash. But he told the school nurse and the aide that changed him that Frank had been pressed in his pants. And they asked him what? They said, well, my pants were wrinkled. My mom ironed my pants while I was in them. So, unfortunately, they believed him. And I was called to school. The police were made aware of what had happened. And so, end result is Frank was seen by a team of dermatologists at Metro the next day. And it was verified that it was just diaper rash. The pressure of sitting day in and day out, you know, helps to make the diaper rash even more prominent.
Yeah, one of the times we were changing Frankie, we had him up on his back, and I was messing around with him. The fly landed on his lip. Took my finger and I shoved it in his mouth. Well, a couple other guys come in the cabin and I didn't realize it, but Frankie still had it in his mouth. He pulls it out between his tongue and his teeth and he shows everybody, and everybody was all grossed out. It's pretty funny.
First of all, no, second, I fuck. First of all, Carrie Helen was HPA, and Master Hospital. Me, who been nasty. And we fought the wrong for a couple months. Before she left, she gave me a hit.
Girls go for Frankie. I have no idea why. I've had several tell me they thought he was cute. But I remember one time my girlfriend was walking by and Frank started making the kissing sounds that he made. And I said, hey, only I get to do that. And he immediately, what fucker then?
And since he turned 18 years old, it gets to be a real trip. Frank's found out he has all kinds of legal rights. And at Molly Stark, he decided he wanted to have X-rated movies and knew he had the right to them. So Molly Stark had to deal with all this. It took him a little while, but then they realized they couldn't keep him from having them. So they let him have the movies. Somebody had to go get them for him. And then it was required that somebody sit with him through the movies, I would assume, you know, in case he had any questions or whatever, they could be answered.
Well, I was headed back towards my cabin after a campfire, and Frank called me over and he wanted to tell me something, and I went over to talk with him, and then, you know, he just said, Kyle, I want you to know something. Out of all the people in the camp here, you're my best friend. And then he asked me to give him a hug, and I, you know, bent over to give him a hug, and turned around and tears just started rolling out of my eyes. And I just headed on back towards my cabin and turned around to kind of like take a look, and he was laughing at me.
Frankie came up to me one day, just out of the blue, asked me a question. He goes, hey, you want to see me make Kyle cry?
But we had an incident when we went through a psychological testing for Frank. Well, Frank fooled around with the psychologist that was giving the test, and the end result being the psychologist said Frank was retarded. Well, between me and Frank, we knew what had happened. So I requested that the therapist, you know, re-interview Frank, re-examine him. What Frank was doing is he was playing with the psychologist, purposely showing himself to be retarded when he wasn't. And he just, it was a big game to him.
I'm 26 years old. The second oldest living with this condition. Coffee is a friend of mine. He go capture for camp. I call camp happy shit. Because I'll be doing it for games and fish. We never go out nowhere. We stay in camp happy shit. 10 days. I think we should go out one day for a couple days a week. Last year I got in trouble for my behavior because I chose a staff member at camp to marry me, and the male consul have spit on me.
He told her that if she didn't marry him, he'd kill himself. And I guess she got all upset, started crying and stuff. And that was the last straw for Jeremy. He got pissed off, and along with a lot of other things Frank had been doing that day.
Well, it was one night towards the end of the session at camp, and by that time Frank had pulled all of his shit during the whole week, and we were getting pretty sick of it. So we're about to put him in bed, and he wouldn't cooperate, and he started spitting on the staff in our cabin. And so we all got together, gathered around him, and thought we'd give him a taste of his own medicine, and we started spitting on him. And he got kind of pissed, but, you know, what can he do? I think he needs to learn his own lesson.
Frank told me later that he had gone to the camp director and told her that they had raped him. And what was interesting to my mind, though, was that it took 3 of them to take Frankie in a spit fight.
You know, many times with Frank's condition, they often ask, many people do, whether you can tell, is it a cause of his condition or is it Frank? Well, it's very, very hard to tell unless you spend an extreme amount of time with Frank. But usually it ends up Frank's having fun with his condition.
I've been here 7 or 8 years. I'm scared about this, about me. This being the first time I hear. By myself, with a friend of mine. I know I have valuable friends of mine, always, but I might lose. I'm scared I might lose them for good as a mover because they might stop me.
It was the last day of the session. Frankie didn't have any clean clothes left, and all he had was like a heavy metal concert t-shirt and had like obscene words on the back, and I didn't think it was appropriate for camp, and I didn't know what to do. And Bill, the head counselor, said, "It's on the back, you know, what difference does it make?" And that like summed it up for me, you know. It's like he's cool, but nobody's gonna know it.
Frank's a very unique work of art. I mean, as is his mom, of course I love him, but I love him for all the other reasons too. He's a real trip.
Because you read about like rock bands trashing hotel rooms and stuff, and or like Ozzy Osbourne biting the heads off of animals, and like that's, to me, that's all just a pose, you know. That's an act. Frankie's the real thing.
Oh, Frank's the type, well, as charming as he is, he would charm a fish out of his scales and then laugh at him for having a nude fish. I mean, that's just the way he is. A charming, very charming, beautiful boy, but can be just as mean as he is charming. He can be kind, can be loving, outgoing, then he can become an introvert, he can be mean, he can be derogatory. Frank almost sums up what all of humanity is like in one little person. He just is that way, and that's the way you have to deal with Frank on Frank's terms. He'll never, never bend to what you want. You got to bend to Frank.